was 19 years old when she learned that some doors are never meant to open for people like her. She had spent her whole life on the outside looking in, watching from a distance as others lived the kind of life she could only dream about. But on one cold evening in November, she made a decision that would change everything. She was a scholarship student at Academy, one of the most expensive and prestigious schools in the country. The kind of place where students drove cars that cost more than her mother had earned in 10 years of work. The kind of place where last names meant everything and bank accounts meant even more. Did not belong there, she knew it. Everyone else knew it too. She had earned her spot through hard work and nothing else. Her grades were perfect. Her test scores were among the highest the Academy had ever seen, but none of that seemed to matter to the people around her. To them, she was just the poor girl who got lucky, the charity case, the one who did not fit in. Her roommate was a girl named, who came from a wealthy family but had a kind heart, was one of the few people at who treated like a human being. She did not care about money or status. She only cared about whether someone was a good person or not, and she had decided early on that was one of the best people she had ever met. It was who convinced to attend the annual gala. The gala was the biggest event of the year. Every powerful family in the city attended. Business owners, politicians, celebrities, and old money families who had been rich for generations. It was a night of expensive gowns, diamond jewelry, and conversations that could make or break careers. Students were allowed to attend, but only if they received an invitation, and invitations were not given to just anyone. They were reserved for students whose families donated large sums of money to the school. Students like were usually forgotten. But this year something strange happened. Received an invitation. She found it in her mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, a thick white envelope with gold lettering. Her name was written in elegant script on the front. She stared at it for a long time, not quite believing it was real. When she showed it to, her roommate squealed with excitement. "You have to go," said. "This is amazing. Do you know how rare this is?" Shook her head. "I don't think it's a good idea. I don't have anything to wear. I don't know anyone there. I'll just end up standing in a corner feeling stupid." But would not take no for an answer. She spent the next 3 days convincing to attend. She offered to lend her a dress, do her hair, and stay by her side the entire night. Eventually gave in. The dress gave her was simple but elegant. It was navy blue, made of soft fabric that fell just below the knee. It was not as fancy as what the other girls would be wearing, but it was the nicest thing had ever put on her body. On the night of the gala, stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized herself. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low bun. Her eyes, usually tired from late nights of studying, seemed brighter somehow. She looked almost like she belonged. Almost. Smiled at her from across the room. "You look beautiful," she said. "Now stop worrying and let's go have some fun." The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Wellington Hotel, the most luxurious venue in the city. When stepped through the entrance, her breath caught in her throat. The room was enormous, filled with crystal chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Round tables covered in white cloth were arranged throughout the space, each one decorated with flowers and candles. A stage stood at the far end of the room, and on it sat a grand piano, black and shining under the lights. His heart ached a little when she saw the piano. It reminded her of something she had tried very hard to forget, but she pushed the feeling down and focused on the present. Led her through the crowd, pointing out different people and whispering bits of gossip in her ear. Tried to smile and nod, but she could feel eyes on her. Curious eyes, judging eyes. Eyes that looked at her dress and knew immediately that she did not belong. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself to relax, but then she heard the voice. "Well, well, well, look who decided to show up." Turned around and found herself face to face with Victoria. Victoria was the daughter of Richard, the man who had donated more money to Academy than anyone else in history. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful. Perfect hair, perfect skin, perfect clothes. Everything about her screamed wealth and power. She was also the person had ever met. From the first day arrived at, Victoria had made her life miserable. She whispered insults in the hallways. She made jokes about clothes, her background, her family. She made sure everyone knew that was different, that she was less than. Now, Victoria stood before her with a glass of champagne in her hand, and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I didn't know they were letting just anyone into the gala this year," Victoria said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I thought you needed an invitation." Kept her voice steady. "I have an invitation." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Do you? How interesting. I wonder who made that mistake." She looked up and down, her gaze stopping on the navy blue dress. "And what exactly are you wearing? Is that from a thrift store, or did you borrow it from the cleaning staff?" A few people nearby laughed, felt her face grow hot. Stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "Leave her alone, Victoria. She has every right to be here." Victoria barely glanced at, "I wasn't talking to you." She turned her attention back to, "Look, I'm just trying to help. You clearly don't understand how these things work. This gala is for important people, people who matter. You're just going to embarrass yourself." Wanted to say something. She wanted to defend herself, to stand up and fight back. But the words would not come. She had spent her whole life being told she was not good enough, and in that moment, standing in that beautiful room surrounded by beautiful people, she believed it. Victoria smiled, sensing her victory. "That's what I thought." She turned to walk away but paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Try not to touch anything expensive. I know it must be tempting when you're not used to nice things." And with that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving standing alone with her borrowed dress and her broken pride. Put a hand on her arm. "Don't listen to her, she's horrible, everyone knows it." But could not shake the feeling that Victoria was right. She did not belong here. She never had. And no matter how hard she worked or how high her grades were, she would never be one of them. She looked around the room at all the smiling faces and sparkling jewelry, and felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. She had no idea that before the night was over, everything was about to change. Spent the next hour trying to make herself invisible. She stayed close to, spoke only when spoken to, and did her best to avoid Victoria and her group of friends. But no matter where she went in that massive ballroom, she could feel eyes following her, whispers trailing behind her like shadows. The dinner portion of the evening was about to begin. Guests were being guided to their assigned tables, and felt a small wave of relief wash over her. At least when everyone was sitting down and eating, she could blend into the background. She could survive a few more hours of this, and then she would never have to come to one of these events again. Squeezed her hand. "Our table is over there," she said, pointing toward the left side of the room. "Come on, let's go sit down." But as they made their way through the crowd, noticed something that made her stomach drop. Victoria was walking in the same direction, and she was heading straight for them. "Please tell me she's not sitting at our table," whispered. His face fell. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." When they reached the table, Victoria was already there, standing behind a chair with her name card in front of it. She looked up and saw, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Oh, wonderful," Victoria said. "Looks like we're going to be dinner companions. This should be interesting." Said nothing. She found her seat, which was directly across from Victoria, and sat down without making eye contact. Sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. It was a small comfort, but was grateful for it. The table filled up quickly. There were 8 seats in total, and soon they were joined by 6 other guests. Most of them were students all from wealthy families, all friends with Victoria. Recognized a few of their faces from campus, but none of them had ever spoken to her before. As the first course was served, The conversation at the table turned to summer plans and family vacations. One girl talked about her trip to the south of France. A boy mentioned his family's new yacht. Victoria described the private villa her father had rented in Italy for her birthday. Kept her head down and focused on her food. She had nothing to contribute to this conversation. She had never been on a plane in her life. The farthest she had ever traveled was a bus ride to visit her grandmother 2 towns over. But Victoria was not about to let her fade into the background. So, Victoria said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chatter, "What about you? Any exciting plans for the summer?" Everyone at the table turned to look at her, felt her cheeks burn. "I'm not sure yet," she said quietly. "I'll probably be working." Victoria tilted her head, pretending to be confused. "Working? Like a job over the summer?" She exchanged glances with the others at the table and a few of them snickered. "How interesting. I didn't know people still did that." "Some of us have to," said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Of course. I keep forgetting that not everyone is as fortunate as the rest of us. It must be so hard for you, being surrounded by all of this." She gestured around the room at the chandeliers and the flowers and the well-dressed guests, like a fish out of water. Gripped her fork tightly under the table. She wanted to say something, anything, to defend herself. But she knew that whatever she said would only make things worse. Victoria was playing a game and did not know the rules. The main course arrived, and the conversation shifted to other topics. Allowed herself to breathe again. Maybe the worst was over. Maybe Victoria had grown bored and would leave her alone for the rest of the night. She was wrong. It happened so fast that did not even see it coming. Victoria stood up from her chair, holding a full glass of red wine. She said something about needing to stretch her legs, and she began walking around the table. Did not think anything of it. She was too focused on trying to get through the meal without drawing any more attention to herself. But then Victoria was standing right behind her. And then the wine was everywhere. It poured down her back, soaking through the fabric of her borrowed dress. It splashed onto her shoulders, her arms, her hair. The cold liquid seeped through to her skin, and she gasped in shock. The entire table went silent, then the tables nearby, then half the room. Sat frozen in her chair, unable to move, unable to breathe. Red wine dripped from her hair onto the white tablecloth. Her beautiful navy dress, the one had lent her, was ruined, stained beyond repair. Victoria's voice rang out through the silence, high and dramatic. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. I don't know what happened. I must have tripped." But she had not tripped. Everyone knew it. The smirk on her face made it perfectly clear. Finally found the strength to turn around. She looked up at Victoria, who was standing there with an empty wine glass in her hand and a look of fake concern on her face. "Are you okay?" Victoria asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I feel just terrible. That dress looks like it was really special to you. I mean, it's probably the nicest thing you own, right?" A few people in the crowd laughed. Others whispered to each other behind their hands. 300 pairs of eyes were now focused on the poor scholarship girl sitting in a puddle of red wine. Jumped to her feet. "That was on purpose," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Everyone saw it. You did that on purpose." Victoria put a hand to her chest, looking wounded. "How dare you accuse me of something like that? It was an accident. These things happen." She looked down at and shook her head slowly. "I suppose this is what happens when you invite people who aren't used to being in polite society. They simply don't know how to handle themselves." Could feel tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not here, not in front of all these people. She stood up slowly, wine dripping from her dress onto the marble floor. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment, but she forced herself to stay upright. The room was watching, waiting. Everyone wanted to see what the poor girl would do next. A waiter appeared at her side, a young man with kind eyes. He held out a stack of cloth napkins without saying a word. It was such a small gesture, but it was the only act of kindness had received all night. She took the napkins with trembling hands and whispered a thank you. Victoria rolled her eyes. Well, this has been entertaining, but I think dinner is getting cold. She returned to her seat as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just destroyed someone in front of hundreds of people. The conversations around the room slowly started up again. People returned to their meals, to their gossip, to their champagne. The moment was over for them, just another bit of drama to discuss later. But the moment would never be over. She stood there, stained and humiliated, surrounded by people who had watched her suffer and done nothing. Not one person had stood up for her. Not one person had told Victoria to stop. They had all just watched, like she was entertainment. The tears were coming now, and she could not stop them. They spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the wine that stained her skin. She needed to leave. She needed to get out of this room, away from these people, away from the laughter and the whispers and the cruelty. She needed to run. But as she turned toward the exit, something caught her eye. The grand piano on the stage. It sat there in the spotlight, black and beautiful, untouched all evening, and suddenly was not in the ballroom anymore. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere far away, in a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper and a second-hand piano that her mother had saved for years to buy. She could hear her mother's voice, soft and warm. She could feel her mother's hands guiding her fingers across the keys. She could smell the lavender perfume her mother always wore. And she remembered the last thing her mother ever said to her. "Music is your gift, my love. Never let anyone take it from you." Stopped walking. She stood completely still in the middle of the ballroom, wine dripping from her dress, tears streaming down her face. And she made a decision. Stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, her eyes locked on the grand piano. The noise around her faded into nothing. The whispers, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it disappeared. There was only her and that piano, shining under the lights like it had been waiting for her all along. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she had touched a piano. 3 years since she had allowed herself to play. 3 years since her mother had closed her eyes for the last time and left alone in the world. The memories came flooding back, whether she wanted them or not. Her mother had been a pianist, not a famous one, not a rich one, but a brilliant one. She had grown up poor, just like in a small village far from the city, but she had a gift. Her fingers could make a piano sing in ways that made people stop and listen, in ways that made people feel things they could not put into words. She had dreamed of performing on the great stages of the world, concert halls filled with thousands of people, standing ovations that lasted for minutes, her name in lights. But life had other plans. She got pregnant young. The father left before was even born. And suddenly, the dream of becoming a concert pianist was replaced by the reality of raising a child alone with no money and no support. She never complained, not once. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. But no matter how tired she was, no matter how hard things got, she always found time for music. Their apartment was small and cramped, with thin walls and a leaky ceiling. But in the corner of the living room sat an old upright piano that her mother had saved for years to buy. It was scratched and worn, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. But too, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Every evening, after dinner was done and the dishes were washed, her mother would sit at that piano and play. Sometimes she played classical pieces, complicated and beautiful. Sometimes she played simple melodies, soft and sweet. And sometimes she just let her fingers wander across the keys, creating music that came from somewhere deep inside her soul. Would sit beside her on the bench, watching her mother's hands move like magic. And eventually, her mother started teaching her. "You have the gift too," her mother told her one night, after had played a simple piece without making a single mistake. "I can see it in you. I can hear it when you play." From that moment on, music became everything too. She practiced every day, sometimes for hours at a time. Her mother taught her everything she knew: technique, emotion, expression, how to make the piano speak, how to tell a story without using any words. By the time was 15, she was better than most pianists twice her age. Her mother cried the first time she heard play Chopin, not because she was sad but because she was proud, because she knew that her daughter had something special, something rare. "You are going to do all the things I never could," her mother said, holding his face in her hands. "You are going to show the world what real music sounds like." But 1 year later, everything changed. Her mother got sick. It started with a cough that would not go away. Then came the fatigue, the weight loss, the trips to the doctor that always ended with bad news. The diagnosis was cruel and final: cancer, stage 4. There was nothing they could do. Watched her mother fade away over the course of 6 months. The woman who had always been so strong, so full of life, became weak and thin. Her beautiful hands, the ones that had created so much music, trembled when she tried to lift a glass of water. But even at the end, even when she could barely speak, her mother talked about music. "Promise me," she whispered one night, holding his hand in hers. "Promise me you will keep playing. Promise me you will not let this gift go to waste." Promised, she would have promised her mother anything. 3 days later, her mother was gone. The grief that followed was unlike anything had ever experienced. It was a weight that pressed down on her chest and made it hard to breathe. It was a darkness that followed her everywhere she went. It was a silence that filled the spaces where her mother's music used to be. She tried to play the piano once, a few weeks after the funeral. She sat down at the old upright in their apartment and placed her fingers on the keys. But the moment she pressed down, the tears came, and they would not stop. Every note reminded her of her mother. Every melody was a memory. Every chord was a wound that had not yet healed. She could not do it. She could not play without her mother, so she stopped. She closed the lid of the piano and never opened it again. She threw herself into her studies, worked harder than anyone else, and earned a scholarship to academy. She told herself that music was part of her past, that she had moved on, that she was fine. But standing in that ballroom, staring at the grand piano on the stage, she knew she had been lying to herself. She was not fine. She had never been fine. She had just been running. Running from the pain, running from the memories, running from the thing she loved most in the world because it hurt too much to face it. And now here she was, covered in wine, surrounded by people who thought she was nothing, with nowhere left to run. Appeared at her side, concern written all over her face. "Let's go. We can leave right now. You don't have to stay here." Did not respond. She was still staring at the piano. Touched her arm gently. "Are you okay?" Finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but there was something different in it, something that had not been there before. "My mother was a pianist," she said. "She taught me to play when I was 5 years old. She used to say that music was the one thing in this world that could not be bought or sold, the one thing that belonged only to the person who created it." Looked confused. "I didn't know you played piano." "I used to." Eyes were still fixed on the stage. "I stopped when she died. I couldn't do it anymore. It hurt too much." Behind them, the sound of Victoria's laughter rang out across the room. She was telling her friends about the wine incident, acting out the moment with exaggerated gestures. They were all laughing like it was the funniest thing they had ever seen. Something shifted inside. It was small at first, like a spark catching fire. But it grew quickly, spreading through her chest until it filled her entire body. She was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of letting people like Victoria make her feel like she was worthless. Her mother had given her a gift and she had buried it out of grief. But her mother had not raised her to be a coward. Her mother had raised her to be strong. "What are you doing?" asked as started walking. She did not answer, she just kept moving. One step, then another, toward the stage, toward the piano, toward the thing she had been running from for 3 years. Victoria noticed her walking and stopped laughing. "Where is she going?" she asked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Oh, this should be good. Is the scholarship girl going to entertain us now?" More laughter, more whispers, more eyes turning to watch. Climbed the steps to the stage. Her ruined dress left a trail of wine droplets behind her. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but she did not stop. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment, running her fingers along the smooth black surface. It was beautiful, perfect. Nothing like the old upright she had grown up with, but it called to her just the same. She pulled out the bench and sat down. The room had gone quiet now. Everyone was watching, waiting. Some with curiosity, some with amusement, some with the expectation that she was about to embarrass herself in front of everyone. Victoria's voice cut through the silence. "This is going to be hilarious. I bet she doesn't even know how to play." Placed her hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth beneath her fingers, familiar even after all this time. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother, her smile, her voice, her hands moving across the keys like water flowing over stones. And then she began to play. The first note rang out through the ballroom like a heartbeat, soft, single, alone. Then came the second note, and the third, and slowly, like a flower opening to the sun, the music began to bloom. Had chosen Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was the most difficult piece she had ever learned. It was also the last piece her mother had ever performed, at a small recital in a community center just 2 months before she got sick. Had been in the audience that night, watching her mother pour her soul into every note. She remembered thinking that she had never heard anything so beautiful in her entire life. Now, 3 years later, she was playing the same piece. Not for an audience of 20 people in a rundown community center, but for 300 of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the city. She was playing it in a wine-stained dress, with tears still drying on her cheeks, surrounded by people who expected her to fail. But the moment her fingers touched the keys, none of that mattered anymore. The opening section was gentle and searching, like someone wandering through a dark forest looking for a way out. Played it with her eyes closed, letting her fingers remember what her mind had tried so hard to forget. The notes came back to her like old friends, like family, like her mother's voice whispering in her ear, guiding her through the darkness. The room had gone completely silent. The laughter had stopped. The whispers had stopped. Even the waiters carrying trays of food and drinks had frozen in place, unable to move. Victoria stood near her table, a champagne glass halfway to her lips. Her smile had faded. Her confident expression had cracked. She was watching with something new in her eyes, something she had never felt before when looking at the scholarship girl. Doubt. The music grew stronger. The gentle wandering gave way to something more powerful, more urgent. Hands moved faster across the keys, building the melody layer by layer, like a wave rising from the ocean. The notes tumbled over each other, fighting and dancing and crying out all at once. People started to stand. First one, then two, then a dozen. They rose from their seats as if pulled by invisible strings, drawn toward the stage by a force they could not explain. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others had their hands pressed to their chests, overwhelmed by emotions they did not know how to name. In the back of the room, an elderly man in an expensive suit stood watching with intense focus. His name was, and he was one of the most respected conductors in the world. He had led orchestras in Vienna, Paris, London, and New York. He had discovered some of the greatest musical talents of the past 30 years. He had been invited to the gala as a guest of honor, expecting nothing more than a boring evening of small talk and mediocre wine. But now he was watching a girl in a ruined dress play the piano like her life depended on it. and he could not look away. Did not see him. She did not see anyone. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back in that tiny apartment with the peeling wallpaper and the leaky ceiling. She was sitting on the piano bench next to her mother, their shoulders touching, their hearts beating in time with the music. She could feel her mother beside her, not as a ghost or a memory, but as something real, something present, as if all those years of grief had finally cracked open and her mother had come flooding back in through the music. The ballade reached its most difficult passage, a cascade of notes that required perfect precision and lightning-fast fingers. Had practiced this section thousands of times as a teenager, and even then she had struggled with it. Now, after 3 years without touching a piano, she should have stumbled. She should have made mistakes. She should have proven Victoria right. But her hands knew what to do. They remembered, and they played the passage flawlessly, each note ringing out clear and true like bells in a cathedral. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. She did not even notice. The music slowed again, entering its final movement. This was the heart of the piece, the part that separated good pianists from great ones. It was not about technical skill anymore. It was about emotion, about truth, about reaching inside yourself and pulling out something raw and real and offering it to the world. Thought about her mother, about the dreams she had never achieved, about the sacrifices she had made so that could have a better life, about the nights she had come home exhausted from work but still found the energy to sit at the piano and teach her daughter to play. She thought about the promise she had made at her mother's bedside, the promise she had broken when she closed the lid of the piano and walked away. And she thought about all the people who had ever told her she was not good enough, all the Victoria of the world who looked at her and saw nothing but a poor girl who did not belong, all the doors that had been closed in her face, all the times she had been made to feel small and worthless and invisible. She poured all of it into the music, every ounce of pain, every drop of grief, every spark of hope that still lived inside her. She played like she was having a conversation with her mother across the distance of death. She played like she was telling her story to the entire world. She played like it was the last thing she would ever do. The final notes hung in the air, fragile and beautiful, then silence. For a moment nothing happened. The room was frozen, suspended in time. 300 people stood motionless, barely breathing, still caught in the spell of the music. Then the applause began. It started slowly, just a few hands clapping together, but it grew quickly, spreading through the room like wildfire. Within seconds, everyone was clapping. They were cheering. They were rising to their feet if they were not already standing. The sound was deafening, a roar of appreciation that shook the chandeliers and rattled the champagne glasses. Opened her eyes. She looked out at the crowd, at all those wealthy, powerful people who had ignored her and mocked her and made her feel like nothing. And now they were standing. For her. For the poor scholarship girl in the wine-stained dress. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were not tears of shame. They were tears of something else entirely. Relief, joy, freedom. Was in the front row, crying and clapping and shouting's name. Beside her, other students were applauding too. Even some of Victoria's friends were on their feet, caught up in the emotion of the moment. And Victoria herself stood frozen in place, her face pale, her expression shattered. The girl she had tried so hard to destroy had just proven herself to be more talented, more powerful, and more memorable than Victoria could ever hope to be. And everyone had seen it. Everyone knew it. There was no coming back from this. The applause continued for what felt like forever. People were shouting for an encore. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were turning to each other, asking who this girl was, where she had come from, how they had never heard of her before. Sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She did not know what to do. She did not know what to say. She had not expected any of this. She had just wanted to play. She had just wanted to honor her mother's memory. She had just wanted to prove to herself that she was not broken beyond repair. But as the applause finally began to fade, she noticed something. A figure was walking toward the stage. An elderly man with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He moved with purpose, like someone who knew exactly what he wanted and was not going to let anything stop him from getting it. Watched him climb the stairs and approach her. She had no idea who he was. She had no idea that he was one of the most powerful people in the classical music world. She only knew that there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. He stopped in front of her and smiled. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet room, "I have been listening to music for over 50 years. I have heard the greatest pianists of our time perform on the greatest stages in the world." He paused, and his smile grew wider. "But I have never in all my years heard anything quite like what you just played." His breath caught in her throat. She did not know what to say. The man extended his hand. "My name is, and I would very much like to talk to you about your future." Behind her, the crowd erupted into excited whispers, but barely heard them. She was too busy staring at the hand being offered to her, trying to understand what was happening. Her mother had always said that music would open doors that nothing else could. Had never believed it until this moment. Stared at the hand being offered to her. Her mind was spinning, trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. A few minutes ago, she had been standing in the middle of the ballroom covered in wine, humiliated in front of 300 people. Now she was sitting at a grand piano, being approached by a man who looked at her like she was something precious. She reached out and shook his hand. Her fingers were still trembling from the performance. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Who are you?" Smiled warmly. "I am a conductor. I work with orchestras around the world and I help young musicians find their path." He paused, his eyes studying her face. "But more importantly, I am someone who recognizes extraordinary talent when he sees it. And you, my dear, are extraordinary." Did not know what to say. She had spent so long being told she was nothing that she had started to believe it. Hearing someone call her extraordinary felt like waking up from a bad dream. The maestro continued. "I would like to offer you a full scholarship to the International Conservatory of Music in Vienna. It is one of the finest music schools in the world. You would study with the best teachers, perform with the best musicians, and have every opportunity to become the pianist you were meant to be." The words hit like a wave. Vienna, a full scholarship, a chance to study music at one of the most prestigious schools on the planet. It was everything her mother had ever dreamed of, everything she had given up when life got in the way. And now it was being offered too, not because of her family name, not because of money, but because of her talent, because of the gift her mother had given her. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. She could not stop them. She did not even try. "Why," she whispered, "why me?" The maestro tilted his head, looking at her with kind eyes. "Because I have spent my entire life searching for musicians who play with their souls, not just their hands. Most people can learn technique. Most people can learn to hit the right notes at the right time. But very few people can make an audience feel something. Very few people can tell a story with nothing but music." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did that tonight. You made 300 strangers feel your pain, your love, your loss. That is a gift that cannot be taught. It can only be born." Looked down at the piano keys, still glistening under the lights. She thought about her mother, about all the years of practice in that tiny apartment, about the sacrifices and the struggles and the dreams that had never come true. But maybe they were coming true now, just not for her mother, for her. "I would be honored," said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you so much." The maestro nodded, satisfied. "We will talk more tomorrow. For now, enjoy this moment. You have earned it." He stepped back and the crowd began to surge forward. People wanted to shake her hand, to congratulate her, to ask her questions. Faces blurred together as tried to process everything that was happening. She felt like she was floating, like none of this could possibly be real. pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around, hugging her so tightly that could barely breathe. "I can't believe it," said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe that just happened. You were incredible. You were absolutely incredible." Hugged her back, holding onto her friend like an anchor in a storm. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You're the one who made me come tonight. You're the one who believed in me." Pulled back and looked at her with fierce pride. "I always knew you were special. I just didn't know you were hiding this." Smiled through her tears. "I wasn't hiding it, I was just afraid." The crowd around them continued to buzz with excitement. People were talking about the performance, about the scholarship offer, about the mysterious girl who had appeared out of nowhere and stolen the show. Someone mentioned that they had recorded the whole thing on their phone. Someone else said they were going to post it online. Did not think much of it at the time. She was too overwhelmed to care about videos or social media. She just wanted to get through the rest of the night without falling apart. But by the next morning, everything had changed. The video of her performance had gone viral overnight. It had been shared thousands of times on every platform imaginable. News outlets were picking up the story. The headline was everywhere. "Scholarship student humiliated at elite gala. Her response left everyone in tears." People from all over the world were watching Play Chopin in her wine-stained dress. They were reading about how she had been mocked and ridiculed by wealthy students who thought they were better than her, and they were falling in love with her story. Messages poured in from strangers offering support and encouragement. Musicians reached out to praise her technique. Teachers from prestigious schools expressed interest in working with her. Donations started coming in from people who wanted to help other students, like students with talent but no money, students who deserved a chance. Within a week, a scholarship fund had been established in her mother's name. It would help young musicians from poor backgrounds afford the training they needed to pursue their dreams. The first donation came from the maestro himself. The second came from a famous pianist who had seen the video and been moved to tears. Could hardly believe it. Her mother's name was going to live on. Her mother's dream was going to help other people. The woman who had given up everything for her daughter was finally getting the recognition she deserved. But there was one more thing needed to do before she could move on. On her last day at academy, she ran into Victoria in the hallway. It was not planned. It was not dramatic. It was just two people passing each other on the way to somewhere else. Victoria stopped when she saw. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with everything that had happened. Finally, Victoria opened her mouth. "I wanted to say," she paused, struggling with the words, "I wanted to apologize for what I did at the gala. It was wrong." Looked at her. She studied the face of the girl who had made her life miserable for so long. The girl who had poured wine on her dress and laughed while she suffered. The girl who had tried so hard to make her feel worthless. But did not feel anger anymore. She did not feel hatred. She just felt tired, tired of carrying the weight of other people's cruelty. "You tried to make me feel small," said quietly. "You wanted everyone to see me as nothing, as less than you." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But my mother taught me something that you will never understand. She taught me that music doesn't care about money. It doesn't care about status or last names or how expensive your dress is. It only cares about one thing." Victoria waited, her face pale. "Soul," said, "and that's something you can't buy." She did not wait for a response. She simply turned and walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone in the empty hallway. 2 weeks later, boarded a plane to Vienna. She carried with her a small suitcase, a photograph of her mother, and a heart full of hope. She did not know what the future would hold. She did not know if she would succeed or fail. But she knew one thing for certain. Her mother was with her. In every note she played, in every melody she created, in every dream she chased. Her mother had given her a gift and was finally ready to share it with the world. As the plane lifted off the ground and the city grew smaller beneath her, closed her eyes and smiled. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning.